We were there to climb, not to set an example. We revived the tenuous Irish link with Everest by following Howard Bury's footsteps through Tibet to the North Ridge, scene of the last sighting of Mallory and Irvine in 1924 and still, in 1993, without a British ascent. That mystery, obscure information, and a reputation for fierce technical difficulty at extreme altitude characterised the North Ridge, a compelling route, a mountain calling. These are the words of Dawson Stelfox in the foreword to Lorna Siggin's wonderful book Everest Calling, Ascent of the Dark Side, the Mallory-Irvine Ridge, which documents the Irish expedition to the north side of Everest in 1993. The mountain may have been calling to Dawson, Frank Nugent, and the many others involved in this great adventure to put an Irish climber on the summit of Everest for the first time. But to achieve this task, it would take people of immense skill, courage and determination to come together, perhaps like never before, on the island of Ireland. To achieve this elusive goal, as Dawson had alluded to, Ireland had no great history with Everest of high-altitude mountaineering. How could this call be answered? How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the second episode of the Why the Mountains podcast with me, your host, Stephen Farley. If you are a hill walker or a mountaineer, or just someone with a love of stories of adventure in the mountains, this is the podcast for you. In this first series, we are exploring the history of Irish mountaineers on Everest, from the earliest pioneering days right up to the latest ascents. We will take you on a journey from the Irish contribution to the earliest years of alpinism, and the exploration of the Himalayas and Mount Everest, through the breakthrough successes of the 1990s, the heartbreak, the tragedy, the many failed attempts, the loss of mountaineers in their prime, and the latest iteration of Everest climbing through guided commercial ascents. Throughout the following episodes, we will explore what makes these mountaineers tick, how they found their way onto the hills and mountains first in Ireland, then further afield, before tackling the often deadly slopes of Everest. In these next few episodes, we hear from two very well-known Irish mountaineers, Dawson Stelfox and Frank Nugent, leader and deputy leader of the Irish expedition to the north side of Everest in 1993. Sit back and enjoy, and if you like this episode and want to hear more, please like and subscribe to the podcast and spread the word amongst your friends, family, walking, trekking and climbing partners. There will be something for everyone in this series, and I hope you enjoy. At this stage, I can easily name most, if not all, of the members of the 1993 expedition to Everest. But at the start of putting this podcast together, only two names came to mind with regard to Everest in '93, Dawson Stelfox and Frank Nugent. I had the privilege to speak to both of these men, and for this episode we will focus on Frank. I began, of course, by asking Frank, why the mountains?
When I was a young lad, I was born and reared in the centre of Dublin, born in Arbour Hill, which you don't get much more, the north side of Dublin. And I joined the Scouts when I was at Cubs, when I was age 8, and progressed through scouting. And through scouting, I got involved in outdoors, camping, hiking, and, was brought out to climb the Sugarloaf, climb Jouse and Mall and these lovely little mountains that you could get to from the bus in Enniskerry. Mm-hmm. So we would meet up at McBurney's, we'd meet up at O'Connell Bridge, get a bus out to Enniskerry, go up. And, you had to bring your bit of grub, your sandwiches and your flask and of course we sang on the bus on the way out and sang on the bus on the way back. We had a great time. And I loved everything about it. And then when I was, I suppose, 14, 15, I went on 5 annual camps with Scouts. And we always climbed a mountain. We went to the Isle of Man and we climbed Snaefell. It's on the Isle of Man, highest mountain. And then we went to Clonmel and we climbed in the Cumra's. And then we went to down to Killarney one year and we climbed Tork. So it was like that. So scouting, hiking, mountains became. And then when I was a teenager, myself and a pal who we were about the same age, and we both became, when the Scouts would only go hiking maybe once a month, and we would go weekends in between. We joined in Oiga, we started heading off every weekend with our rucksacks, and we walked. We would get a bus to Blessington and maybe walk across the hills and get a bus home on Sunday from Glendalough, having, crossed this mountain and that. And we had our maps and we were marking off we got to know all the mountains, and then began to meet other people with the same interests, and ended up, learning all the different mountains. And got climbing Lug, and then climbed Lug in the snow, and then camped on Lug in the snow, Lug na Quilla, and the whole thing just became mountains for me was what we done. And on long weekends then we'd hitchhike to the Mourns or hitchhike to the Connemara, and we would be climbing the 12 bends. We hitchhike head off on a Saturday, on a Friday, and spend. I remember climbing Carrot Ridge up onto Ben Bawn, and doing a horseshoe and camping down it in those valleys in Connemara, and I just loved every bit of it. And then one Christmas, a group of us went down to Killarney the days after Christmas, Stephen's Day. These guys had cars and they offered us a lift, and when we ended up staying in the hostel down there, and the first time I climbed Carrantoul was in the snow, and I remember it was so frozen on top, and it was very windy. We literally had to crawl from. We couldn't stand up in the wind; it was so strong.
Wow!
And that whole thing, it was just so exciting, and it became my pastime.
Living in Wicklow as I do, it was wonderful hearing how this magnificent journey for Frank started with the Scouts and trips to Sugarloaf, Joyce, Lug na Quilla, or Lug, the highest mountain in the Irish province of Leinster, standing at 925 metres and beyond. Sleeping on the summit in the snow, hitchhiking to further afield mountains with friends. What a wonderful way to spend your childhood, whilst also coming from the north side of Dublin City, a heavily built up urban area that would seem quite far from any peaks. Frank's experience shows that all kids need to develop a taste for life in the outdoors and the mountains is to be given the chance to experience it at a young age, and no better way than through the Scouts.
Yeah, they weren't particularly mountaineers, but they were good people. The Scout, I was in Ockram Street Scouts, and it was a terrific unit. They had about 20 leaders. My leaders, I mean, people who were young adults or older adults, and they were a terrific bunch of people, and they were all out. They were really out to provide. We were working class, and they provided. I mean, the annual camps I went on were probably for no working class kids enjoyed the holidays like we enjoyed, because we went. They brought us plates. We put in sixpence. Every week you put a few bob, and that went into the money for the annual camp. And then one of the camps we went to, Clonmel, we all met. We brought our rucksacks with our sleeping bags and whatever, and all the camping gear was put on the truck and all our rucksacks, and then we all climbed on the back of the truck, and the truck drove us down. I mean, health and safety wouldn't allow people to do it, but they were great, and we did it. I think the camp cost 30 shillings or something, and we were there for 2 weeks, fed and looked after by all these people. It was just amazing.
It is easy to tell that Frank is proud of his working class background in North Dublin. It strikes me, thinking back to the characters in last week's episode, that had Frank been born 50 or 100 years earlier, the mountains would not have been open to him. But in the mid-20th century in Ireland, the Scouting movement were doing this for young people all over Ireland, and continue to do it today, under challenging circumstances. Frank had clearly caught the bug, and he spoke about his first trips overseas.
Yeah, well, myself and Harry O'Brien was my pal in the Scouts, and Harry, the two of us, we went and did a rock climbing course in the quarry, Docky Quarry, I think it was 1964, and we happened to be on the same course as Paul McHugh and Jimmy Heffernan and Jimmy Mackenzie, and these all turned out to be great rock climbers and great guys, and we took to it and straight away, instead of going hiking weekends, we were going rock climbing, and we bought our own rope and gear, and after we did the course, we went off to the Isle of Skye, and we went to, into a shop in Scotland. We bought a new rope and a pair of boots each, and we had 2 slings and 2 carabiners each, and you basically tied the rope around your waist, and we went up to went to the Isle of Skye, and we climbed 5 or 6 days. We went up every day up into the Keogh, and we had a ball to Gabbro, and we climbed the highest peaks there. We mixed walking and climbing together, and and the following year we went to the Alps. We had made a big step, and so we were advised to go to Chamonix, and and the people there, the climbers there, the great. We had mentors, I suppose, in that we wouldn't have called them. We had friends, Emmett Goulding, who was an absolutely wonderful climber, and who had made the first Irish ascent to the west face of the Drew, and he climbed the north face of the Drew. He'd done 3 different great routes on the Drew. He was advising us, and he advised us to go to Scotland first before we go to the Alps, and we did that, and then we went to the Alps, and and I remember we went up, we walked up to the Cavercal hut, which is a famous. Of course, we hadn't got the funds for the hut. We were going to bivvy out, and we bivvied out under the Cavercal boulder, big boulder, famous boulder. And when we were there, these 2 guys came up, and they were 2 Belfast lads. Who was Calvin Torrens and Sammy John Crimble, and they were doing one route on the Moyne the next day, and we were doing another. Now we only had a 120-foot rope. This was inexperienced, because this is the rope which was standard rope for rock climbing in Ireland at the time. But for the Alps, you needed 150 foot at least. In fact, you need 250 foot for the Alps. But at the time, but I remember we had to abseil off, and we had only a 60-metre abseil on the way down, and we literally got down to the end, and we just managed to go to a chock stone in a big groove, and hold on to one end of the rope, and hold the second fella come down, the other fella caught hold of him, and how we survived the first year in the Alps, and if we survived that, we were going to survive anything, and we did, and have, but that first year in the Alps, you really learn. It was there was a lot of snow and ice, so we were just learning so much new stuff, but it was all adventure. Terrific.
In fairness, it does sound terrific, though a little bit scary also, but definitely an adventure. However, other aspects of life always come along to compete for time, and I asked Frank about how he juggled family life with his climbing. Unfortunately, I was unaware of the tragedy that befell Frank and his family with the death of his son, Gavin.
I got married in 1972, and I sort of I didn't go so frequently when we had young children and that, but when the boys got to the age where they were young, I got a camping van, and then every summer, by that stage I had got myself a good permanent job. I became an instructor in Foss. I was a plant fitter by trade, and I was teaching apprentices in a training centre, and I was able to take 3 weeks or 4 weeks. So we would head off to Chamonix with a camp. I know Shane Nolan, he had a camper, and Emmett Goulding would go with a trailer tent and car, and we'd all meet up in the Alps and in campsite, and our wives would be looking after the kids, and we'd be off to do this route and that route and the other route. So I suppose I had about 10 years going to the Alps, and then our second son, Gavin, was born, and he was born with a congenital heart condition, and it meant that I didn't go on any big. Some people were going on expeditions, but because of needing to look after him and that, I didn't go on expeditions. But then he had a major corrective operation in 1985, and he was back in school after it, when unfortunately he collapsed and died coming home from school. So in fact, he died on the 11th of February in 1986. And I had been asked to go on lots of expeditions, and my wife, Carol, she said to me, Frank, if you're asked on any more expeditions, you go, because she knew I had held back on going, Anyway, Joss Lynham invited me to go, and Shane Owen, the guy who was climbing with, invited us both to go to climb Changsi. Now, Changsi is in Tibet, and it's the mountain adjacent to Everest. In fact, the early climbers called it the North Peak. It was Everest North Peak, they called it, but their local name was Changsi. Mm-hmm. And Changsi means North Peak. It's north of Everest. And so I went on that expedition, and it was what they call a post-monsoon expedition. It was October, November. So I went out with that group, and we raised money. We applied to the Sports Council, Mountaineering Ireland, which was then called the Mountaineering Council of Ireland, and we applied for a grant for the first time for an expedition, and we got 5,000 Irish punts.
Wow.
It was the first time we ever, and got money from them. And
did that cover the cost?
No, that was only yeah. But each one of us had to contribute. I think it was 1,500 quid to raise it, and you paid your fare and whatever. And then we got some small sponsorship money, but large. But this was the first time we ever had an expedition that was actually funded by the Sports Council. So I was deputy leader, and Joss. Now Joss was 70, and he had just had some bypass. Bypasses were new as an operation, and he just had a couple of bypasses, and he was flying. So myself and Phil Thomas at the time was an instructor in Tiglain. He was a qualified mountain guide, and myself and him, we got onto the North Col twice, and on the second occasion we went for the top of Changsi. But unfortunately, Phil's feet were freezing. He lost. It was very, very cold, and it was below. It was -20, and he just couldn't get heat into his feet at all. So we were about halfway up to. There's a beautiful ridge on up Changsi, and anyway, he had to stop, and. But I went on and went right up, and unfortunately I came to a place where it was a very, very narrow crest of a ridge, and I stepped out on it, and it creaked underneath my weight. So I just backed off. Now if I had had a rope, I probably could have went to one side of it, but there was no way. It was just beyond what you'd chance on your own. Mm-hmm. And we backed off. So I came back down, and we didn't actually get up Changsi, but when I was up Changsi, I was looking up. You look down on the North Col of Everest, and up the other side was the Northeast Ridge, which is the Tibetan side, which had never been climbed. And of course, in all my homework for going on Changsi, I'd read all about Charles Howard Bury and how him and Mallory and company, they had made the first attempt. They were the first to get onto the North Col, and I'd read all about that. And I knew when I was coming, I knew the next time I was coming back here, I was coming back for Everest. So when I came home from that expedition, I was on the plane, and I had an old notebook out, and I was writing, and I just wrote out, in order to climb Everest, what would I need to do? And I sort of wrote, I need to make contact with other Irish climbers who are involved in high altitude climbing. I need to get together a team. I knew there was great climbers in the north, and I knew there was climbers in the south. I knew almost all the climbers in the south, but I wouldn't know them all in the north. So when I came home, it was like a proposal document. The Mountaineering Council of Ireland, they used to meet, had an October meeting, and I met Dawson Stelfox at that meeting, and I handed him my paper, and I said, I think it's time for a first Irish expedition, and I'm looking for someone who in the north to maybe to come on board with me to put this proposal together. So So I gave him the paper, and he went, and he contacted me then a week or two later and said he was interested. So we went and we met at Joss's house, Joss Lynham's house, and Joss had a great library of all the Himalayan journals, and he had all the maps and information about all this stuff. And we decided that we would put together a my proposal was we'd pick 10 or 12 of the best Irish people with a lot of experience. We would go and attempt one of the other 14,000 metre peaks. There's 8,000 metres. There's 14 of them.
14 of them, yeah.
Yeah, we would try one of those first, and then we'd see how we got on, and then with that group we would then progress maybe 2 years later, and the reason for the spacing was that we'd have to raise funding, and we knew that, and people would have to get off work, and because everybody was amateurs, so the plan was we'd do one. So Dawson went and he booked Manaslu. We picked Manaslu, which is the 7th highest mountain for go, and I went and I booked Everest on the north side with the Chinese Mountaineering Federation for 1993, pre-monsoon. Yeah. And so we, at Dawson, we sat together, and we invited, I think there was 7 climbers from the north and 5 from the south.
Frank had always put his family first, but at the encouragement of his wife, he started to consider these overseas expeditions, first Chiangsi, then Manaslu, in preparation for Everest. With Dawson and Frank involved, from the north and the south, I asked Frank to elaborate a little on how the team was put together.
Very much. Well, we knew Fairhead had been a big thing in those days, so Fairhead was a bit of a catalyst, So we knew there was strength on both ends of the island, So it was a question of it was a question of making sure what we wanted were people who were the most important thing if you're going climbing in the Himalayas is that you're able to manage yourself. You have got to be able to carry a 4-stone rucksack. You got to, at least 20 kg in modern terminology, and yourself. You have to be able to go up and down very steep ground. So there's no question of being roped. Nobody's going to rope you up so easy. So you have to have that proficiency. So you needed people who had led and done decent routes in the Alps at least. So I suppose the test, the litmus test was people who had done good routes in the Alps and were at the front end of the rope, So anyway, we put together a group like that. We went out to Manaslu. The weather was awful. It snowed and snowed and snowed. And we didn't have a great experience as a group. There was a lot of egos at play. And some people, because I suppose myself and Dawson, we had presented ourselves as leaders of the expedition. We were joint leaders of the Manaslu Everest expedition. That was the presentation at the start, and we invited people to come. And then we went out on the expedition, and there was definitely, a bit of people weren't accepting. We thought we would climb the mountain because it was so heavy with snow. We would work as groups, and whatever climbers were going best when we got to the high camp, we would then make up groups. But some people wanted to separate from the very start. They wanted to be divided. They wanted to climb alpine style, so they wanted their tent and their equipment and that. And so there was, let's say, a dispute about tactics, how we would go about it, etc., which didn't improve. The weather didn't help it. So we ended up, 5 of us ended up establishing a very high camp and having a go at the summit. And the other boys, there was 3 pairs, they didn't come up that far. Okay. And we came back and it wasn't happy. So when we came back after it, we had meetings and we decided that we reorganised the group, and Dawson would be the leader of the Everest expedition, and I would be deputy leader. Right before we were doing joint leader, But Dawson was clearly, he had become fully qualified as a mountain guide, and it was very obvious that he had shown all the. So I felt that was probably part of the problem. We had joint leadership, probably didn't work so much. So I felt it was better to have an absolute clear leadership. So we had a leader and a deputy leader. And then we invited, the five of us that got on really well together, we invited 3 other people to participate, other than the other people that had been there.
Oh, so it was a different crew.
Yeah. So what we did was, whatever monies were over after, they were divided proportionately between the groups. So they were given their money to do whatever mountaineering object, because they felt they might go and do other high mountains. So it was better to agree to differ than to go out as a divided group again.
I think we have all been in situations where disagreements over the plans come to the surface. However, it strikes me that an 8,000 metre mountain is definitely not the place to have a group that the members are not all on the same page. This reorganisation of the group and the leadership structure would prove crucial to the success of this endeavour.
Well, it had, because that expedition, he was leader and he was also Northern Ireland, and I was deputy leader and I was from the south, and the team was a mixture of north and south. And so the fundraising, a lot of the fundraising took place in the south. So being deputy leader meant a lot of the pre-expedition was actually raised, and we'd had to raise 150,000 Irish punts. So a big part of the job as being deputy leader took place pre-expedition. And of course it's making all the travel arrangements and tickets and all that. Now, and I would think when we went on the expedition, I would just be, not a lot, I'd be just sitting in on a meeting, and sometimes I might pre-meeting, I might have a chat with Dawson about agenda and issues that we might need to consider and all that sort of. But I would have had a close relationship with Dawson, but he was the leader, undisputed.
Equally crucial to Frank and Dawson's relationship and the success of the expedition was the support of family at home.
Well, my wife has always been terrifically supportive, but I probably would be more defensive in a sense. I would never assume to go, but the way I mitigated against it was always making sure my wife always knew whoever I was climbing with knew we weren't crazy, knew we were we were safety minded, knew we were fit. I mean, the way you mitigate in climbing is you go out there really fit. You know what you're doing, and you know who you're climbing with. That that you'll be there for each other, and that's my wife has always known that, and when she saw the group that we put together for Everest, she wasn't worried, in this sense. But well, it is a big ask. And I've always been aware it's a huge ask, but had a wonderful wife, and I think that you'd never do anything without that.
I went on to ask Frank about the choice of route for 1993, but I have included Frank's thoughts in the first episode of this series. Please go back and check out that episode if you haven't already. An expedition of this size, like all expeditions of this time period, would have a massive impact on the local people and economy, and as deputy leader, Frank would be aware of the importance of this.
When you go out into a country like this, it's very important that there's some benefit for the local population, local people. So by hiring porters and by hiring cooks, and when you go out there, you're leaving some money in the local economy. So part of the reason we would have done that was for that reason. Now, when you go out on the north side of Everest, the Chinese can use Chinese army lorries to bring all your equipment up. But if you're on the Nepalese side, it would all be Sherpas carrying the stuff back in those days. And you'd end up paying on the Changxi expedition. I could think we'd 40 or 50 porters who you paid every day for 10 or 12 days, and a huge amount of money coming into their pockets. Like now when we on Everest, we had to we paid the money to the Chinese Mountaineering Association, and they then would pay Tibetan porters to provide yaks, and we actually travel from base camp to advanced base camp using yaks, 2 days with yaks, carrying all our gear, and they would have made 2 trips with 40 odd yaks. So all that money, the yak herders all come from the local valleys, and it's very important. And of course, the great thing about the north side of Everest was it was 2 Tibetans that made the first ascent on that side. First Chinese ascent was made by 2 Tibetans. So it's great, in 1960, So that's where they found a way up this second step, and found a way to the summit.
So now, on Everest, everything is ready. I asked Frank to describe how they went about the plan.
We had great weather at the start. We arrived there, and there was a Chinese expedition just ahead of us. They were a week ahead of us. And it was what they called an all-Chinese expedition. There was obviously Chinese, mainland communist China. There was Taiwan, and there was Hong Kong. They had people from each part of China, Taipei, and they put and Tibetans. So their idea was they would have this unified. They were ahead of us, and they were at the advanced base camp. They had camped at advanced base camp when we arrived, and they had already fixed the rope up to the North Col. So we agreed with them that we could use their rope, provided we would carry some loads for them. We did a bit of a trade, but it was great. We got up there, and the first few weeks we managed to get up to advanced base camp, and then we got our tents established on the North Col, and we're loading food into it, and then we worked in pairs, two groups of 4. I remember myself and Mike Barry kicking our way up and leaving a tent just short of our Camp 2 site. Carried huge loads, and then the next day another 4 come up and carried them up and established the Camp 2. Dawson would have been with other people, and then we were in the business of trying to establish the camp above that, and Tony Burke and Richard O'Neill Dean, they were almost up to around 8,000 metres when the weather broke, and it broke for about maybe 2 weeks, and we never really got much chance to get back up on the mountain. So we had tents in place on the North Col. We tents in place at Camp 2. We hadn't yet got Camp 3. Our plan was that we would put Camp 3 in place, and then we would put 2 groups up there, 2 groups of 2, and the 4 of them would have a go at the summit, and then another 4 would come up and have a second attempt. That was the basic plan. We had 8 climbers in the whole team.
So
the plan fell awry. We suddenly were running out of time, and then we suddenly got a forecast to say there was a couple of good days coming. So we knew we'd have to modify the plan. So we said we would get 2 groups to go up and establish a high camp, and that leaving 2 people there, and those 2 would have a first attempt, followed by 2 more who'd come up a day behind and have a second attempt. And we knew the weather was probably going to be good. The weather forecast wasn't great the whole time. So it was decided that myself and we worked as a group. We divided into 2 groups, and we threw around who should make up these groups. And when the 2 groups came together, it was agreed that Dawson and myself would make up the first team to have a go, and that Tony Burke and Robbie Fendon, backed by Mick Murphy, would make a second attempt. But that we would be, myself and Dawson would be supported by Sherpa Kunka and by Mike Barry from Tralee. Yeah, they would be our backup pair in establishing the high camp. So we set off, and we worked our way up, and we got into Camp 2 and Kunka. So Mike's breathing, he got a really bad chest infection, so he had to drop back down, leaving just Kunka and myself and Dawson. So when we got up the next morning, we gave Kunka a couple of bottles of oxygen and a tent and we loaded him up with a load, and he headed up, and then we came behind. We loaded up with everything else we needed, and we tramped behind. His instruction was, when he got to 8,100 meters or so, he would just drop his stuff and head back down. So we met him as he was coming back down, and we kicked our way up. And when we got up to where we were, we decided, we saw there was a good place to camp higher. We went an extra couple of 100 meters, and we dug out a ledge for our small tent. We had 2 titanium. We had brought these lightweight axes, thinking they'd be great for the ascent. The only problem was they were useless at chopping. We had a lot of really hard ice, and we were trying to find a horizontal ledge. Had to dig out for just a tent for the two of us, and it took us about 3 hours to dig out this ledge, and finally got the tent pitched and got in, and we just made coffee and soup, and we got as much liquids as we could into us. And then the next morning we were up at 5:30 or something like that, and had a coffee and headed off with a couple of bottles of oxygen each, and headed off. And it was fantastic. We were just us. The mountain, the snow was absolutely pristine. Nobody had been up here for 2 weeks. So we were looking at absolutely clean, no footprints, nothing. So we just took turns. I would go out, I'd count 200 steps, and then I'd step aside, and then Dawson would come up and he'd kick his 200 steps and step aside, and we just went. Unfortunately, my first bottle of oxygen ran out after about 3 hours, and I was getting nothing through it, and the only thing was to change it, and I put on the other bottle, and we kicked our way, and we just kept going, and we were making great progress. But at about 1:30, we reached the first step. We were actually up on the actual ridge. You're coming up the face, and suddenly you're on the ridge, or on the summit ridge, and there's the first step, and then there's the second step. But by that stage, my second bottle of oxygen, I was having great difficulty, and I couldn't understand why, because we both had 2 bottles of oxygen each. We had them set at 2 litres per minute, and Dawson was still on his first bottle, and my 2, and I wasn't getting oxygen. So it was 1:30. We knew it would be dark about 5. So I said, Dawson, look, you go. I don't know. I'm not going as well as you now, because there's something wrong with my oxygen gear's all freezing up. And anyway, he went, and he got up. When he got to the second step, he found a ladder these Tibetan fellas that put up in the 60s and in 70s, I think it was. And he got to the summit, and meanwhile as I was heading down, I was trying to mark the way as best I could. So knowing that, the funny thing, when you look up, you see all the when you're looking up a mountain, you see all the little crags and things. When you look back, all you see is white. You don't see the rises. So I could see there was going to be a huge problem when I turned to go back down. I could see finding your way down is going to be not going to be too easy. Now, you got to understand that it was pristine. There was rope sticking out here and there where there had been a previous expedition and that, but it wasn't by any means clear the way to go. So anyway, I found my way back down to the tent, and I was about an hour above the tent. I could see Robbie and Tony coming, see 2 figures coming up the opposite way, and they were waving at me, and they were giving me thumbs up, which I knew probably meant Dawson was up. But we had one radio between them, and he'd taken that. so I didn't have the benefit of having a second radio. So it was very funny, you know. But when I met the two lads, they told me he was up and he was on his way down. So I helped them to put up their tent, and we got a brew going, and then they headed up. It was getting dark. It was dark, and they headed up. They followed my footprints up to help him come off the hill safe. But it was fantastic. It was exciting. We were just there, totally on our own. Nobody else. This huge mountain, and it was a huge adventure. You know, you can't do it now. You couldn't go up there. It's rope. You have to sign up to some commercial outfit who will put all the ropes and tents in place. So what we did then, you cannot do now.
What an amazing adventure for them all. But the decision that Frank had to make, to turn around so close to the top so that Dawson could continue, I can't imagine how tough that was. Frank explains what went wrong.
I just knew that something wasn't working right. It was only a year later, after we come back, that I found out what happened. There was a meeting in Tiglin of mountaineering, the international body that decides the rates for the Himalayas. And the person who came from the Chinese side was one of the climbers. And he thanked Joss for the use of our tent, and told Joss that they had used 2 of the bottles of oxygen to sleep overnight on their way down. They had met before. I should have told you before the weather broke. They had got to the summit, but they were coming back down as the weather broke. The day that our lads were going up, there was the day they were coming down, and when they got back, their own tent was blown away. So they climbed into our tent and they used the oxygen.
Oh, Frank.
And I picked up the 2 bottles of oxygen that I picked up, and they put them back in the polystyrene box with the plastic caps back in them, and we'd no reason to believe they were used.
Yeah.
We thought they were. We considered all those bottles of oxygen were full. But it was only afterwards.
Devastating.
Yeah. So Joss told me this, and I went out and I met. I met the guy. And he, of course, it was a very incoherent conversation, trying to talk to him through I had tea with him out with Joss out in, can't remember, some hotel out there in the south side. We had afternoon tea one day, and yeah, but it was very incoherent conversation. But anyway, it was nice to meet the guy. You know, it put down, if you read the accounts, put down to me being ill. I was trying to operate without oxygen, but it was hawking through. There was no oxygen, you know, and I couldn't understand why there wasn't, and all the settings were the same as for both of us. And that was really because we never used oxygen before, you know. We'd no knowledge of it. Nobody before us had, no Irish climbers before us had. So it was, you know, total new. But I was thrilled when Dawson come down. From that moment, in fact, the first time somebody said to me hard luck was when I came in. My next door neighbour, when I came home, all my neighbours come in, you can imagine, and my next door neighbour said, hard luck, Frank, I'm not getting. And it stopped me in my tracks, because I didn't consider, I was deputy leader of a successful, I had a big part in getting Dawson up there. I had never seen it any other way. And I don't.
Being there in that room with Frank, I know he means every word of what he says. His face lights up when he talks about Dawson making the top, the genuine joy and pride that he feels in being part of this momentous achievement for Irish mountaineering. Being deputy leader and playing such a huge part in this endeavour means the world to him. One thing that he said struck me, that no one else now is able to experience what they did. I asked him to elaborate on this.
Well, I just think it's such a shame that when the adventure that we had was absolutely unbelievable. Just the 2 of us up there. You know, you get an idea of that altitude. You know, it's you know, when you take off a mask, you know, you're gasping. You know, it's really, you know, and it's so pretty, it's so beautiful. It's white. It's it's everything, and this is everything you'd ever dreamed of. And here we are, just the two of us, and we have this to do. And we were going so well, and I just the whole idea that nobody else can have that opportunity now, because the whole thing now is tied up between the Nepalese government. Now they have a need to earn revenue for tourism reasons, and I can understand that. But it also means no mountaineer can have the opportunity to test themselves, the way the way we could, or it's all totally tied up with commercialism and the cost of it. It's like we paid $4,000 for permission to climb the peak for the whole lot of us. Now I don't know, what is it, 10,000 per person, and that's only for permission. You've then got to pay the company, and the company will charge you for the Sherpas and for the tents and for the ropes and all the part of the infrastructure that they put in place. But it's not the same thing. It's just so sad. I can't. I be honest. I'm just so happy that I find mountaineers. We don't. You have to move away from Everest, and any mountain that's managed that way. They're doing the same thing on all these other peaks, the 7 peaks. They're all now being managed commercially. So look, you'd knock more crack in going out and climbing a 6,000 meter peak in the Himalayas, an unclimbed one, and have your own adventure on it. That'd be me as a climber. I'd knock more crack out of that, and I've tried it. It's great. You just have to get away from. I mean, there's the bucket list idea that people have of you have to. Everest is on their list and all that. A lot of them set out, they're not mountaineer. No, it's a great achievement for anybody who does it. But if you've been a mountaineer all your life, it's different, and it's an awful pity that modern day mountaineers can't get the opportunity that we had.
Talking to Frank gives me a real sense of the scale of the adventure of climbing Everest in the 1990s. But it was also a time when great changes were starting to happen on the mountain. I asked Frank one final question about what it all means to him now.
No, I think it was a life experience. It's all about people. We had some good experience and we had some bad experience. How good we were as managing, with a group, and there's so much learning. It isn't just the climbing. It's a great social effort. I mean, I was walking last Saturday, and we did 20 kilometres in Wicklow over the hill, up around Lara, up around Scar, and around that area there, around through Lockdown, and with tree. It's just great. The sociability of climbing. It's super to be doing something physical and mental at the one time. That's what it is, really. It's to be doing it with people of like mind. It's always a wonderful experience,
What an enjoyable chat with Frank Nugent. He is so down to earth, friendly and welcoming into his home in Dublin, and speaks so plainly but yet so well about Everest in 1993, but also his life in climbing and mountaineering and what it has meant to him. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Join me again next week, where the focus is still the 1993 Irish Everest expedition, but we will hear from the leader himself, Dawson Stelfox. I hope you can join us. Stay safe and stay cool.